Hello, folks. Good morning. Welcome. My name is Kajal Gupta, and I'm with the Office of Public Participation. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for the State Water Board's Financial Dashboard Pilot webinar, hosted by the Department of Drinking Water and moderated by the Office of Public Participation. This webinar is being held 100% virtually and is also being webcast publicly in English. We're also recording today's event and we'll make sure that it's accessible for our attendees and anyone who may not be able to join us today. Let's see. Next slide. All right, well, on our current slide is the mission statement for the water boards collectively. We work to achieve our mission through an array of programs established within our divisions and regions. As it's the Water Board's mission to preserve, enhance, and restore California's water resources for the benefit of present and future generations, we want to begin this meeting by acknowledging the groups who have and who continue to experience economic, environmental, and social disadvantages as a result of historical marginalization and whose daily lives are impacted by racism and injustices. As a reminder, our work here today should strengthen the empowerment of Indigenous and community voices as we work together to provide clean, safe, affordable water to all Californians. Next slide. All right, so let's review what we'll cover today. Today, you'll be hearing from Kristen Appold from the Division of Drinking Water's Needs Analysis Unit. She will be covering the following: giving a State Water Board introduction, a background and demonstration of the dashboard, and any future next steps. Next slide. Again, we want to thank each and every one of you for finding a way to join us virtually today. We thank you for your patience and understanding as we quickly move to 100% virtual meeting space so that we can adapt to the current public health concerns. We're doing our best to make sure that everyone can participate in an effective way and that this time is valuable for you. We don't expect any delays, but ask for your patience in advance should any difficulties arise. During today's event, we will have poll questions throughout and an open Q&A period at the end of the presentation. During the Q&A period, attendees will be able to submit questions through Zoom's Q&A feature, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. These questions will be read by the host and answered by the panelists. Also, if you find that someone else might have entered a question that you too would like answered, you can upvote that question by giving the question a thumbs up. Questions are then organized based on the number of upvotes. If you'd like to speak during the open Q&A period, please remember to raise your virtual hand. This will help us locate you in the attendee list, and if called upon, you'll be asked to unmute yourself so you can speak. I understand that some of our attendees are joining us via phone. And as a reminder, if you're calling into today's event, please remember to raise your hand by pressing *9 on your telephone keypad. And if you're called upon, you can press *6 to unmute yourself. Once you've finished asking your question or providing your comment, you can go ahead and press *9 once more to lower your hand. In addition, this event is being live webcasted on the Cal EPA website, found at video.calepa.ca.gov. If you're watching this webinar through the webcast only and would like to ask a question or share a comment, please email safer@waterboards.ca.gov. Again, that's safer@waterboards.ca.gov. We have someone monitoring the email, and we'll try our best to ensure that your question is answered or your comment is heard. For technical assistance, again, you can email that same email at safer@waterboards.ca.gov. For today's event, we have many State Water Board team members assisting and supporting behind the scenes to ensure that everything is running smoothly and that we have as few participation bumps as possible. They are here to support at all levels, and we want to take the time to acknowledge all their work and dedication. Thanks, y'all. Now, I'd like to introduce Kristen, your host for this morning's webinar. Kristen, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Am I coming through?
Yes, you are.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us this Friday morning. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to explore our new dashboard. This is going to be a very brief introduction from me from the water board. I think we're all eager just to dive in and start exploring this new tool. I just wanted to start off with two poll questions, and let me launch these real fast. Launch the poll. Okay, first, do you think water system financial information should be publicly available in a central location statewide? I'm going to leave this poll open for a bit. Give you a few more seconds to respond. Still getting a few more responses. I'll leave it open for another 5-6 seconds. All right, I'm going to end it, and let's share the results. It looks like 81%, a vast majority of you participating on our Zoom webinar, agree that we should have financial information available to the public, so that's great to hear. And then our second question, have you had an opportunity yet to read our background paper on this dashboard? And let me see if I can find it. Oops, wrong poll. Poll 2. Here we go. And this was sent out to those who registered through Zoom. We emailed that out, and it's posted on our SAFER website as well. Give you all a little bit more time. And if you haven't had an opportunity yet to skim through the background paper, I encourage you to do so. The hyperlink is on these slides. And again, all the materials from today will be available on our SAFER website. I'm going to end the poll now and share the results. It looks like most people have not had an opportunity to skim through it yet, which is totally okay. Again, please check out our website or the emails that were sent out prior to this webinar. There's a lot of really great information in there. I'm going to close this. Okay. Just for a hot second, I wanted to talk a little bit about capacity development. The State Water Board and the Division of Drinking Water supports capacity development for drinking water systems throughout the state, specifically small water systems. And we have a lot of tools and resources available to help with capacity development. Often you're going to hear the word TMS capacity, which means technical, managerial, and financial capacity. And today we're really focused on a tool that's going to help us better understand financial capacity of a water system. And wanted just to provide this definition to keep it in the back of your mind. When we're looking at a system's financial capacity, we're looking at the ability to acquire and manage sufficient financial resources to plan for, achieve, and maintain compliance with drinking water standards. The State Water Board commissioned the UNC Environmental Finance Center to develop this pilot small water systems rates dashboard for a number of purposes, and wanted just to highlight them here. The first is really to provide a tool to small water systems for financial planning and rate setting. And you'll see how systems can use this tool to do that. For the water board, we really needed a tool that will help staff assess the financial capacity of small water systems. We have staff that go out and do sanitary surveys and work with our systems year round. And for those that may need some assistance with financial capacity development, this tool will help staff provide resources and direct systems to the right TA providers or other tools that we have available. And then in general, for the water board, it's important for us to assess the long-term value of financial data collection and analysis. Historically, the State Water Board has collected some data from systems on financial financial capacity through our electronic annual report and some other data collection activities. This tool you'll see includes a lot of new data points that the Water Board historically has not captured, and we're assessing the value of collecting that data in the long run. And that's it. I'm going to turn it over now to the University of North Carolina's Environmental Finance Center, and they're going to provide an overview of the pilot dashboard. Shadi?
Thank you very much, everybody. Just give me a second to share my screen. Hopefully you can see the PowerPoints.
Shadi, we do not see the PowerPoint yet, and your audio is breaking up quite a bit.
What involves
All right, it looks like we're dealing with some technical difficulties a little bit.
I'm sorry, do you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Yes.
My internet actually just went out and reconnected me to the webinar, so I apologize for that. And I just moved to a different location. Hopefully this will be a stronger signal. I think I do need to reshare. Okay, now do you see the screen?
Yes.
All right, let me start over again. Thank you, everybody, and I apologize for the technical issues. So my name is Shadi Eskaf. I'm with the Environmental Finance Center at the University of North Carolina, and I'll be demonstrating how to use the California Small Water Systems Rates Dashboard, which is right now is a pilot financial dashboard, as Kristen has mentioned. Just a little bit of background on who we are. My colleague and I are both on this webinar. Julia Cavalier is a senior research specialist, and I'm the research director at the Environmental Finance Center. We're at the University of North Carolina, but we've been doing creating these kinds of rates dashboards and financial dashboards for a lot of different states. I think we have about 20 different states dashboards out there. I will say for California, it's probably the most comprehensive in terms of different types of metrics have been included. So we were really excited to work with the water boards and with UCLA Luskin Center for Innovation. So we partnered with both organizations to create this dashboard for utilities in the state of California. And really, I'm going to provide a little bit of context and then dive right into the dashboard. So the purpose of these dashboards in general for California and for other states as well is just we find that working with utilities, with water and wastewater utilities, that information and data is really critical for decision making, and that's apparent to everybody here. And it really applies to different stakeholders, and some stakeholders want specific types of data, and there's a lot of communication between these different groups. So you got the utility managers and finance directors talking to the elected officials or the governing boards of the utilities when they're requesting a rate increase for the water system. You're communicating to your customers and explaining why the rates are going up or why the rates are what they are. You're also communicating how you're doing financially, both to your customers as well as to regulators and policymakers. Policymakers need to understand what the financial capacity is for water systems across the state to understand where the needs are. Funding organizations are looking at the financial performance of water systems to better understand whether or not they could provide some loans and what the, how water systems can handle debt going forward. Researchers are always looking for data to analyze and to assist water systems. Technical assistance providers, I didn't even put that on the list, but organizations that work directly with water systems to provide assistance, including us at the Environmental Finance Center network. always looking for information to understand what the context is for water systems. So there's a lot of information that's required for communication, for working with systems, and for making decisions. Primarily, these dashboards have been created, and this particular dashboard has been created mostly for working with utility staff and management and the governing officials, the governing boards, as well as with customers. So it's a tool that's available to help water staff as well as the governing boards and customers understand the financial performance of the water system, as well as the rates, and use this kind of information to help with decision-making, financial decision-making at the water system level. And I'll show you examples and explain what that means. This has really been, creation of these dashboards have been very helpful in a lot of states. We've been doing dashboards in some states for more than a decade now. And we've heard from a lot of users that the dashboards have been helpful for them when talking to their governing officials, governing boards, requesting a rate increase. We've also heard from customers that they understand what's going on with the utility. They like that information to be able to have easy access to information on their systems. And we've done a survey of water and wastewater utilities across the country back in 2014 for the Water Research Foundation. This was a national project that we partnered on with a few other organizations. And we asked utilities, both the staff as well as the elected officials who are in charge of the utilities, to tell us about their experiences when utility staff is asking for a water rate increase and requesting that approval from the elected officials. So what kind of information was being shared, what was important, what was useful, both from the staff perspective as well as from the elected officials perspective. And out of this national survey, what we found was that from the staff perspective, 94% said that sharing information about the utility's financial condition, so what the financial performance is of the enterprise fund, for example, was very or somewhat useful in communicating with the elected officials. So nearly everybody thought that was important. 3/4 said that comparing what their rates are compared to other neighboring utilities' rates was also a very important or somewhat important metric to communicate to the elected officials. And about half said comparing how their rates compared to similar size utilities are also important. So communicating not just financial performance, but also comparing the rates and benchmarking rates against other utilities' rates. And we know that's a very common practice amongst utilities, both in California and outside. And a lot of utilities found that they were doing this themselves. 2/3 at that point were going out there, finding out what other utilities' rates are, either from other sources or whether just calling up systems or looking up on websites themselves. They're trying to go out there themselves to get all that information so they can do these comparisons. Well, the dashboard helps in this process because all that work has already been done for the utilities. From the elected officials' perspective, what they found, what the elected officials thought was very important or somewhat or important factors in deciding whether or not to raise rates, almost everybody said long-term impact on the utilities' financial condition was very important or important. It's not surprising. And about half said knowing what other utilities are charging was very helpful in their making a decision about whether to raise rates or not, both in terms of neighboring utilities or similar size utilities. So it was important from both perspectives, the staff and utility elected officials. And also, of course, the long-term affordability for residential customers. So if you're going to ask for a rate increase, how is that going to affect affordability for at least for residential customers? Some utilities are concerned about residential and non-residential, but let's start off with focusing on residential customers. So to share all that information to the elected officials requires the staff to get all that info from a lot of different sources. And sharing a lot of information with governing boards and with customers can be difficult when the data is coming from so many different areas. So you have consumer confidence reports that communicate water quality and whether there have been any violations with water quality standards. You've got your budgets, you've got your financial statements that you provide every year, and these have a lot of financial data that you could communicate. You could be doing a survey or accessing existing surveys that show what your rates are compared to other utilities rates. The water boards and OEHA have a bunch of different data that you could be accessing and sharing. So there's a lot of great information in the state of California, which is fantastic. It's just a matter of bringing everything together into one place to share a lot of information that tie in with one another so that you don't have to do all that work yourselves, and it makes it easier to communicate with different stakeholders. So that's the point of the dashboard. Now, I will mention with comparing rates and benchmarking rates, the most typical way to do that is to find data that would show how your water rate is at one consumption point. Let's just say 600 cubic feet. What is your water bill at 600 cubic feet, and how does that compare to other utilities rates? And a lot of times we see these kind of graphs where there's a bar chart that shows where you are ranked compared to other utilities. That's a very common way to communicate with stakeholders. The issue with doing benchmarking in this way is that, first of all, you might not be comparing your utility to similar to utilities that have similar cost structures and similar purposes for the rates that they charge. So if you're, for example, a groundwater system and you're comparing yourself to 5 different surface water systems, well, surface water typically costs more. So their rates are going to be higher than your rates anyway, partly because of that. So comparing to similar type utilities is important. And it's hard to do that when you're looking at just a small number of utilities. And also by looking at just a small number of utilities, you don't get a complete picture as far as where your rates compare to other utilities. If you expand that sample and add more utilities, you might find that your ranking changes significantly. You might be only looking at one consumption point. So your bill at 600 cubic feet might appear to be low relative to everybody else. But if you look at your high consumption bills, if you look at your bills at 1,500 cubic feet, you might find that your rates are much higher or much lower in the ranking. So, and that portrays a different story, because that means that your rates at consumption points that are high, which may be discretionary water use, might be higher or lower than what other utilities are doing, but your low volume consumption rates might compare differently. But most importantly, by doing this kind of a comparison, or just having this one graph that shows how your rates compare to other utilities, you're really putting yourselves a little bit in a corner where if this is the only information that the elected officials care about or your customers care about, then the pressure is to always have the lowest rates in this graph. And that might be coming at the expense of financial performance and of system performance as well, and making sure that you have everything that you need to be able to provide your services without creating any violations and without having any long-term financial difficulties. So you need to be able to compare more than just your rates when you're presenting to different stakeholders. And that's, again, part of the reason for the dashboards, because it brings in doesn't benchmark just your rates, but it brings in financial performance, it brings in your system performance, and a lot of other contextual data that is important to understand why your rates might be high or low. And it doesn't create the pressure to always have the lowest rates when you're being compared to other utilities. So the dashboard was created and it's an interactive tool. It's available now on the website. You all have links to it. You can see a different link to it up here in the slide deck as well. Dashboard is up. You could use it. It's free. It's open to the public. This is not behind any kind of firewall. It's available to you. It's available to the customers. It's available to anybody to be able to go in and access it. It's interactive, where you make some selections as far as who you want to look at and what consumption points and who you want to compare yourself to. And I'll show you those interactions when I go through the demo. And it's really, again, to be used by utility staff, governing boards, technical assistance providers, anybody who wants to use and gather that information. As Kristen mentioned, this is a pilot for California where it does not include every single water system in the state of California. As a pilot, the scope was limited a little bit and focusing more on small water systems. So only community water systems that had between 500 and 3,300 connections, service connections, are included in this dashboard. So if you're a water system that has fewer customers or a water system that has more connections than 3,300, you're not in this dashboard, again, because this is a pilot dashboard, so it was limited in scope intentionally. But with feedback from you, if this is something that you find to be useful and that you consider, you like that information to be presented for all water systems, that's one of the feedbacks that I think you could be providing to the water boards through the email that Kristen had mentioned. The rates that are included in this dashboard were rates as of July 2020. So some of you may have updated your rates or changed your rates since then, but most utilities, I think, will have your current rates on the dashboard right now. The financial data comes from existing data sources, and that was the latest available at the time of publication was fiscal year 2018 data as far as getting financial performance metrics, and I'll show you examples of that. The dashboard was posted on August 31st. We're not planning updating the data, so if your rates go up or if your rates change or if financial performance, if you have the fiscal year 2019 audits available, we're not planning on updating those right now. Again, this is a pilot dashboard, but it's so the amount of data that's in there is going to be limited at this point. But going forward, if this is a dashboard that is of interest to you, that again is the feedback that you need to provide to the water boards to look into updating these into the future. The data that was collected as far as the rates, the Environmental Finance Center at UNC, with some help from UCLA Luskin Center for Innovation, we actually contacted the water systems directly and looked at websites and asked for copies of the rate sheets so we can understand what the rates are. So we didn't go, we didn't access other databases that have some rates information. We asked the utilities to supply their latest rates rate sheets. So we had the latest information and we were able to compute the bills for any consumption point between 0 and I think it was 1,800 cubic feet, or for in terms of gallons from 0 to 15,000 gallons in 1,000 gallon intervals. So we calculated the rates for every one of these water systems for all residential customers. And we got additional data from both the water boards and the UCLA Luskin Center for Innovation compiled a bunch of different data from different sources that was provided to us so we can add that information alongside the rates information on the dashboard. We also linked the water systems to Census Bureau data to gather some socioeconomic and demographic information for the communities that your water systems are located in, to show some of the metrics relative to demographic or socioeconomic information. And I should say thank you to every water system that's provided rate sheets to us. I think we had received about 92% response rate, so that was fantastic. If you're a community water system that serves between 500 and 3,300 connections and you're not on this dashboard, I will show you later on an email address where you can provide that information to us and we will add you to the dashboard. So we received nearly everybody. I think we have about 380 or so water systems included in this dashboard. Some water systems have more than one rate structure. So you might have a water system that serves 2 different service areas, and you have a rate structure that applies to one service area and a different rate structure that applies to a different service area. And you'll see both of those showing up on the dashboard as well. So we try to include all the different rates that you have for residential water customers. We don't include wastewater, and we're not including non-residential rates. Some of you might have some non-residential rates that are different than residential, but for this dashboard, it's focused on residential water rates only. I think actually I covered everything on this slide. And just again, the dashboard includes consumption or bills that were computed for a range of consumption from 0 all the way to 1,800 cubic feet and 0 to 15,000 gallons. The other metrics that were provided or data that was provided from other data sources included some financial performance metrics coming from audited statements, as well as data that was compiled in the city's annual report from the state controller's office, and from financial statements that were provided to the Public Utilities Commission. So all those, the audited financial statements, that data for fiscal year 2018 from these 3 different sources were compiled by UCLA's Luskin Center for Innovation and provided to us, and we link that to each water system. So you'll see metrics on operating ratio, days cash on hand, revenues per connection. These things come from your fiscal year 2018 financial data that was provided in these standardized statements. We have some information on demographic changes, so population change for your region, and I'll show that later on. We've got 3 different metrics on how your bills compare, how your rates compare to income for your community, to assess affordability in 3 different ways, in addition to other metrics like percent poverty and unemployment rates that was gathered from the Census Bureau's latest available data. And then water system performance, including the number of violations, water quality and monitoring violations, as well as with compliance status with the human right to water requirements, and the percentage of metered connections. For that last one, we didn't have data for every water system, so there's a lot of missing data for that. But for the data, for those systems that we did have some information that was provided to us, it's included on the dashboard as well. Kristen had mentioned that there's a document that lists, that provides information and explains the dashboard and the metrics. And it explains even how to use the dashboard. So everything that I'll talk about here is summarized in this, I think it's a 12-page document. Some of you have already read it, and that's fantastic. If you haven't read it so far, no worries. I'll be going through most of the information today in more details than what's on that document as well. But the document is a really helpful way to go back if you have questions about how to use a dashboard, what does it mean. It's a good starting point, and then you can always contact us for more information afterwards too. All right, I'm going to pause here and ask if there are any pressing questions for me to answer before I switch over to a demonstration of the dashboard. All right, I don't hear any, so I'm going to switch over. So by going to the link to the dashboard, you'll come to the dashboard right now is embedded on our website, and it could be embedded in other websites later on, but for the pilots right now, it's on our website. If you scroll down, you'll see the dashboard hidden behind the splash screen. Before I go into that, I'll just mention that if you go under the FAQ tab up here, we have that fact sheet that I was just talking about also provided. So it's on the Water Board's website. It's also on our website, available in the FAQ here, so you can download it. And you could click on some of these questions for some answers as well. So with the dashboards, if you click on OK, I'm going to zoom in just a little. Actually, I'm going to zoom out first, show you kind of the full screen version of it. And then I'm going to zoom in because it's going to be hard to see all the details if it's zoomed out like this. But the dashboard shows up in this fashion. The first thing hopefully you all see and recognize is the state of California's map. Every one of these blue dots is a water system that's included on the dashboard. Again, only includes community water systems between 500 and 3,300 connections as listed up here. And it has the rates as of July 2020. So every one of these water systems is included on the dashboard. If it's light blue, it means that we have other data, but not the rates data. So the rates information might be blanked out, but we still have the financials or some other metrics that are presented on the dashboard for you. We've got some, the first way to start, I'm going to zoom in now. The first way to start is to go in here and select the water system that you want to compare. And you can either scroll down and look alphabetically, and these are based off of the names of the water system. And if a water system has more than one rate structure, let me look for an example here. American Valley Community Service District. That water system has two different rate structures, one for East Quincy and one for Quincy. You'll see them listed as water system name dash rate structure. So look for your water system, and you could always start just by typing in the name of a system, and it will automatically help you filter to your water system. So I'm going to start with Corning because it's got all the data available. I'm not trying to pick on Corning, it's just I know that all the data is here, and I can show you a lot of examples using them. But I'm happy if anybody would like to nominate themselves to show up on the dashboard as I go through the demonstration. Feel free to submit that, and anybody wants to from the water boards wants to interrupt and just let me know to switch over to a different utility, please let me know. But for now, I'm just going to focus on Corning. So you select your utility, and the metrics automatically update to include all of Corning's data. There are 4 tabs up here. There's the main page, which has the rates comparison as well as other metrics. So it's rates comparison in the context of a lot of other things. We've got financial benchmarks, we've got affordability, and we've got some system and community information. So this is a system performance metrics and some community information from Census Bureau. The main page is the rates comparison, so-called rates comparison page. But again, it's rates comparison in context of a lot of other information. With Corning, we default here by showing for every water system the water bill at 600 cubic feet, which is a metric that's being used by the water boards for some analysis and for determining eligibility for funds. And it's a common consumption point to do these kind of comparisons. But you can change the consumption point for your comparisons from anywhere from 0 cubic feet up to 1,800 cubic feet in 100 cubic feet. Yeah. So if your average consumption is about 500 cubic feet, and you want to compare your average bill to other utilities' 500 cubic feet bill, then you would just slide over to 500. And you can see that we've got the translation between, or the translation between the 500 cubic feet into gallons. 500 cubic feet is about 3,700 gallons, and this is all per month. If your utility uses gallons as the unit of measurement for charging rates, and you don't really want to be looking at bills in terms of cubic feet, you'll notice that there's a little arrow pointing next to gallons. So if you're a gallons type of utility, click on that arrow, and it will take you to an identical dashboard that is set up to look at consumption points from gallons. So it starts off at 5,000 gallons per month, but you can switch it from 0 gallons up to 15,000 gallons in 500 gallon increments as well. So you can always switch between gallons and cubic feet by clicking on that little arrow that takes you to a dashboard and just updates the consumption units. So I'm going back to Corning. I'm going to go to 500 cubic feet. And it shows, okay, so if Corning's 500 cubic feet, the residential monthly water bill is $25.64. And I'll explain these metrics on the right in a second. I just want to show you the rest of the inputs. So the main thing here is we're starting off by comparing Corning's $25.64 to all utilities, all water systems that's on the dashboard right now. You could select and say, I want to compare Corning to only to water systems that have a similar number of accounts. With Corning, we know that their water system serves between 1,000 and 3,000 accounts. So automatically the dashboard filters and includes only those systems between 1,000 and 3,000 accounts, and updates the metrics that are being used for comparisons. You could look at all water systems. You could compare to similar number of accounts. You could compare to if we have some data and enough utilities within your watershed. So Corning doesn't have that, but for other systems that have enough water systems in their watershed to do a comparison, you can compare to water systems in your watershed. You can compare to water systems of the same water source type. So Corning is a groundwater system. They're now being compared to all groundwater systems in the dashboard. You can compare to water systems with the same rate structure. Corning has a uniform rate structure, which means that they charge $1.17 per 100 cubic foot for all consumption above the consumption allowance, regardless of, there's no increase in block rate structure. It's just a uniform price. Well, you can compare your utilities bills against other utilities based on similar rate structure designs. You can compare Corning or your utilities rates to other utilities rates with that are serving areas with the same customer, same income levels. So median household income for Corning was between 30,000 and 35,000. Well, now you can compare Corning's bills to other communities that have the same median household income, just to see how your rates compare to other communities that might have same affordability or same ability to pay characteristics. You can compare to other water systems in your congressional district, if that's helpful, and then also compare your water system to other water systems within a 50-mile radius. I think it's 50-mile radius, not a 50-mile diameter. So it's 50-mile distance. And again, if you have at least 10 water systems within any of these comparison groups, you can do the comparison on a dashboard. So I'm going to switch back to just showing how this water system compares to all water systems in the state.
Shadi?
Yes.
Hi. Would you mind if we look at Hillmar County Water District and compare that to the other districts in the county?
Hillmar,
Hilmar, County Water District.
There it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. So Hillmar, and I'm not sure if there was a consumption point that was suggested. I'm going to switch to 600 cubic feet. Looks like Hillmar has a fixed fee, actually. So this is, all right, I'll come back to that point. So Hillmar's got a fee of $25.65 for 600 cubic feet. And here's Hillmar. So the red dot shows the system that you're looking at. And again, the blue dots are all the comparison points. So the dials on the right show you the comparisons. I'll start with the first one, bill comparison. So this is Hillmar's $25.65. How does that compare to everybody else, all these other blue dots bill for 600 cubic feet? You'll see that the needle's pointing this way, and you've got different colors on the dial. For the bill comparison dial, the middle dark green area that you see at the very top here signifies the middle 50% of all of these dark blue dots. So between the 25th and the 75th percentiles, basically. So if you're in the middle dark green area, your rates are comparable to the middle 50% of everybody being compared to here. If your needle is pointing to the lower yellow area here on the left, then that means that your bills, that $25, is lower than 90%, 90% of all the utilities that you're comparing yourself to. If your needle is pointing to the higher yellow area here, then your rates are higher than 90% of all of the other utilities they're being compared to. Now, the reason why we're doing it this way is because when you're doing bill comparisons, if you're in the middle majority, then your rates are comparable, essentially. And if you're on the low side or if you're on the high side, both of those don't mean necessarily that you have something wrong, or that there's something bad about your rates. It just means that there's, if you're trying to compare your rates, and if you're lower than 90% or if you're higher than 90%, take a look and see, check the other metrics and see whether or not there are any concerns. So for example, if you're a water system and you have rates that are lower than 90% of the other water systems, then I would suggest taking a look at the cost recovery ratio. And if you find that your cost recovery is in the red, basically showing that your financial performance, your revenues are lower than your expenses, and you have low rates, then that tells a very different story than what we see here with Hillmar. Hillmar has low rates, but their cost recovery ratio actually looks pretty good. So in that case, their low rates are not affecting their financial performance as it would be if you have low rates and your financial performance and if your revenues are lower than your expenses. So that's the purpose of the yellow areas here. We're not showing anything in red for bill comparison. It just means that, take a look and make sure that your rates are where they need to be. And if you're higher than 90% of the utilities, it's the same thing. Is there a reason why your rates need to be that high? And if so, then that's valid. But it's just pointing out that comparing to other utilities, you're higher than or lower than 90% of the utilities. So that's the bill comparison dial. So with Hilmar, Hilmar's example, their bill for 600 cubic feet is $25.65 per month, and it's lower than most utilities. If we switch that to similar number of accounts, it's still lower than 90% of similar sized utilities, but it's right on the edge. So it's close to that 90th percentile. And you can see the median, minimum, and maximum of the comparison group that you're being compared to showing up as text around the dials as well. So I'm going to switch back to all utilities. The next dial is conservation signal. And this is just one metric that you could use to assess whether or not your rates incentivize conservation. It's one of many. I mean, there's a lot of ways to look at conservation and conservation pricing. One metric is to see what what's called the marginal price, what the volumetric price is at a high consumption point. So with residential customers, if a residential customer is using 1,500 cubic feet, if they're a single family home and they're using 1,500 cubic feet, that's typically a lot higher than most other residential customers. And there may be some room for conservation there. So what's that volumetric price that you're charging for the next unit of consumption above that point? If you're using 1,500 cubic feet and you go to 1,600 cubic feet, the bill would go up for Hilmar for $0. So that's why I'm saying earlier that it looks like Hilmar's got a flat fee. It's not a volumetric price structure. It's just they're charging $25.65 for all consumption. So that shows up as there's $0 as a volumetric price. If I switch back to Corning, they're charging $1.17 per 100 cubic foot above that 1,500 cubic foot. With gallons, we look at 10,000 gallons. And the higher you are with your volumetric price at that high consumption point, the more financially incentivizing your rate structure is to, the more it incentivizes your customers to reduce their consumption, to reduce their high consumption. Because if you have a high volumetric price at a high consumption point, then customers are having to pay higher prices or relatively high prices for that next unit of consumption. So they have incentive to reduce their consumption, to lower their bill by that amount. And so you see with Corning here is 117. You can see again around the dial, you've got what the minimum is for the comparison group, what the median is, and what the maximum is. So there's a utility that's charging $28.68 per 100 cubic foot at that consumption point. I don't remember which one that is, so please don't ask because I'll have to dig around looking for that. But the median is about $2.76 per 100 cubic foot above that 1,500 cubic foot consumption point. But there are quite a few utilities that have a fixed fee and not a volumetric, so they show up as a zero down here. And again, that means that there's no financial incentive from the rate structure to conserve because the customer that uses a little bit more water is not going to pay anything extra for it. The next dial is, I'm going to switch over to, I'm going to focus on this one first, the median affordability, and then I'll come over to cost recovery. So we've got the bill comparison. We see how the bill compares, and it's a relatively low bill for Hilmar. For a lot of utilities, it wouldn't be this low. It would be on the higher end up here. And the question that might come from the elected officials or from customers is, well, if these are high rates, how's that affecting our affordability? How are we able to pay for it? What is the affordability of your rates, essentially? There's a lot of discussion, especially in the state of California, about measuring affordability, and the water boards are taking a look at that. And there's a lot of, I'm not going to get into what the water boards are doing right now to assess affordability. I'm going to show you metrics that are calculated that are similar, but they're not tied to what the water boards are doing. So this dial right here is looking at the percent median household income, which is a very common metric to use. It's flawed in some ways in assessing affordability. There are some pros and cons with each metric that assesses affordability. This one is a very common one to look at. It asks for that consumption point, for this consumption bill, so that $25.65, how does that compare to the median household income for our community? And if you click on any of these question marks, these blue question marks that you see around, you get a pop-up that comes up and explains each of the metrics and provides a little bit more information as well. So what the formula is and some of the data. So if you click on, I think right now I'm showing Hillmar, right? So I'm in Hillmar County. And it's showing you what the bill is compared to, if you take that $25 and you multiply it by 12, your annual bill is $307, and the median household income for that area is $62,000. So taking a percentage of that, it's about 0.49% of median household income. Now, a couple of things to note. One is we are not using the median household income that's being assessed by the water boards. So when you go and apply for funding from the water boards, or when the water boards are looking or when you're looking at affordability, you might have different MHI numbers because of different ways of calculating what median household income is. What we're doing here is we're providing what the nearest census place or county, what the income level is for that census place or county. So for that region that you're serving, what is the median household income? So we're not looking at your particular customers. We're not looking at your specific service area and calculating a median household income from your service area. If your water system is in an easier one to talk about, again, is just Corning. If you're in the town of Corning, then we're looking at all of town of Corning's median household income. And we're looking at all of town of Corning's population change in this other dial here. So the percent MHI numbers here that you see on this dial might look a little bit different than when you talk to the water boards or to any of the other state agencies, and they're calculating percent MHI slightly differently. And that's one of the things that we can kind of explore going forward. But for the pilot dashboard, we're showing for the region what the income level for the region is. And the reason why we're focusing on the region is because, first of all, with service areas, we didn't have the data available to assess that for every one of the water systems here, but also because we were focused more on regional impacts to financial performance. So even if your service area's median household income is of a certain type or certain amount, if the region itself has lower or higher MHI, or income and population growth, that eventually bleeds into your service area as well. So there are some regional impacts to income and demographics that are captured by the census place or by the county, as opposed to just your small service area boundary that might be a subset of the census place. I hope that's clear. If you have any questions, please submit them. I'm happy to answer that later on. So this is the percent MHI, and we're not showing anything here as a specific percent is good or a specific percent is bad. We're showing that it's on a scale. So a 1% MHI here, that's really up to you to decide whether or not you think on an affordability scale, whether that's affordable for your median customers or customers who are close to your median income levels. We do show a tick mark here, the 1.5%. Just as a reminder that when you're applying for funding, there's a metric that says if you have higher than 1.5% MHI, then specific eligibility criteria are met. So it's reminding you of that 1.5% for eligibility criteria for funding, but it's not meant to be a metric, at least on the dashboard, that's communicating that anything below 1.5% is good and anything above 1.5 is bad. I strongly believe that affordability is best addressed and considered at the local level when you're thinking about how your rates are affordable or not. And I mentioned earlier, this is just one metric to measure affordability. If you click on the affordability tab, we add two others. We still have the median affordability metric, but we have two other metrics. So I'll come to those when I come to this tab as well. All right, so that's percent MHI and bill comparison conservation signal. Cost recovery is looking at the revenues and the expenses during that fiscal year 2018. Again, that was the latest available data that we had access to at the time that the dashboard was created for a majority of the systems. So from audited statements, from the city's annual report with the State Controller's Office, or from reports, financial statements submitted to the Public Utilities Commission, the operating revenues and operating expenses were extracted from those statements, and we calculate the operating ratio here as what were your total operating revenues, divide that by total operating expenses for fiscal year 2018. So this is a metric where there actually is a benchmark for you, a target for you to achieve. And you want to have your revenues to be higher than your expenses. So you want that ratio to be above 1.0. Anything below 1.0 means that for that fiscal year, the revenues that came in were lower than the total operating expenses for that fiscal year. I'm going to switch back to Hilmar. So with Hilmar, that ratio is 1.26. If you click on that question mark, you can see that from the data that was provided, the operating revenues was $656,000, and the operating expenses, including depreciation, was $520,000. So if you divide that number, the first number by the second number, you get a ratio of 1.26, which is above 1, which is great. And if you switch over to Corning, I think it was a little bit less than 1.0. So it shows you different examples of above or below that benchmark. A little bit more about the cost recovery ratio. So with the operating ratio, we're looking at total operating revenues divided by total operating expenses. Operating expenses includes depreciation and amortization. Now, you don't typically write a check for depreciation. It's not an actual expenditure. It's an expense that you report on. It's an accounting term, an accounting value that you include in your reports, spend. The reason why it's included in here is because it approximates an amount that is not the total amount, but it's an approximation of the amount that you might need to be spending on average annually in order to keep your infrastructure, your assets in good shape. If you think about depreciation, basically what that means is you're taking a look at your assets. They all had a purchase price and a value when you brought them and you install them and it's brand new. And every year there's a little bit of wear and tear on that infrastructure, and there's a reduction in the value of that asset. And that's what depreciation is. You're depreciating the value of that asset every year because it approximates the physical conditions and the physical deterioration of that asset. And by including depreciation in operating expenses, what we're showing here is if your revenues are higher than operating expenses, it means that you had enough revenues coming in from your monthly charges and other operating revenues to pay for operations and maintenance, your daily operations and maintenance expenses, as well as putting enough money aside to cover the value of depreciation. So that if you're putting that money aside, theoretically at the end of that asset's life, you have all that money saved up that you can use to purchase a replacement asset to replace that pipe, for example, that's deteriorated. What's not included in this indicator is debt service and any kind of capital expenditures that's not depreciation. And that's important to know because those things are not included in operating expenses. But with depreciation being included, it somewhat captures some of that too. Usually your depreciation is higher than debt service. Not always, but usually is higher. Now with depreciation, the reason why we don't show 1.0 to be green is because if you are setting aside funds to that would cover depreciation only, as well as operations and maintenance, when that asset depreciates entirely, and you have to replace it, you'll find out that the cost of replacing the asset is a lot higher now than it was back when you installed it a long time ago, back on the value that you were depreciating on. So you need to be setting aside even more than what the depreciation value is to accommodate higher costs going forward. And also, depreciation doesn't include any consideration for capital expenses that you need to have for new infrastructure. So if it doesn't already exist, it's not going to show up in depreciation. So covering operations, maintenance, and depreciation alone is not going to be sufficient. You need to be creating enough revenue to pay for operations, maintenance, all of your debt service, and all of your future capital expenses. And depreciation captures some of that, but not all of it, which is why we have a little bit of a higher target of 1.2, but that 1.2 target is not a fixed target. It's it's just a target to kind of encourage utilities to think about generating more revenues than just operating expenses, to be targeting a little bit higher because you've got additional costs that are not captured by operating expenses. Okay, so moving on to the last two, and with Hilmar, we don't have this last one, so I'm going to switch over to Corning real quick. And if you don't have data for a specific metric, it does blank out. It has a red box that comes on top and says no data available. But with Corning, we've got data available on this days cash on hand metric. This is another financial metric. Hopefully, if you're familiar with financial statements, if you create those statements, if you take a look at them, you'll be able to calculate this one relatively simply. But this is a metric that estimates the number of days, average days of operations and maintenance expenses that you could pay for out of your unrestricted cash and investments. So every water system, you've got unrestricted cash that's sitting in your enterprise fund or whatever fund you use to manage your water system. How long can you pay for daily O&M costs out of your unrestricted cash? So taking a look at those, basically your reserves. How far can you go with your reserves to pay for your operations maintenance only, not capital and not debt service? And that's calculated by looking at your unrestricted cash and investments, dividing it by an average of your operating expenses, excluding depreciation, because then it's just looking at operations and maintenance costs alone. And with Corning, for example, their end of year fiscal year 2018 unrestricted cash would have been sufficient to pay for about 112 days worth of operations and maintenance for their water system back in fiscal year 2018. And for that, the targets, this is actually a metric that's being assessed by funding organizations, by credit rating agencies, by water systems that are trying to assess reserves and having a minimum target for reserves just to make sure that they've got enough funds to cover unexpected reductions in revenues, or for example, with COVID-19 and changes in collections, that's affected a lot of utilities' cash flow. So having enough reserves to be able to accommodate fluctuations in revenue is important, as well as to have the funds that you need to pay for anticipated expenses going forward. And targets for that have really varied. There isn't a specific goal that's a nationwide goal or a statewide goal for every system to have on days cash on hand. But we've seen a lot of utilities aim for at least 90 days or 180 days or 365 days. And that's something that that's determined locally as far as setting your own targets. We've got for this dial here, we're showing anything below 90 days to be in red, just because for a lot of systems that might have bi-monthly or quarterly billing, you definitely want to have more cash on hand available to accommodate at least one full billing cycle, usually more than that. Most systems that we've seen have been aiming for at least 180 days or more. So that's why 180 days is showing up as green here. And if you're more than 365 days, you have a lot more reserves and a lot more security with your finances than if you had something lower than that. So these two here show financial metrics. And the last one is regional population change. And again, this goes back to looking at your census place, not at your service boundary. So we're not looking at your water system population. We're looking at the population for the town, the city, or the county that you're in. Usually it's a town or city that you're in. And seeing whether or not population has increased or decreased between 2010 and 2018. So looking at census data, Census Bureau's data, looking at 2010 and 2018's American Community Survey data. And for, are we back at Corning? We're back at Corning. We're showing that, if you click on the question mark, you can see that the population for Corning City was 7,546 in 2010, dropped to 7,535 in 2018. So really no change in population. And that is what you're seeing here. It's only a 0.15% reduction in population over that 8-year period. This is not an annualized percentage. This is the actual percentage from 2010 to 2018. I'm going to switch over to Hilmar. And with Hilmar, we're showing that it was growing at a bit, about 17% increase. And it's showing that the population for, and we've got Hilmar linked to Hilmar-Irwin CDP. And if there are, this is actually a great opportunity to communicate. If you go through this and you identify there may be some inaccuracies in maybe like we've assigned the wrong census place to your water system, you can always contact us and we'll make that correction on the dashboard. But with Hilmar, we looking at the Hilmar-Irwin CDP, and the population there was close to 5,000, and that went up to 5,800, which is an increase of about 17%. And the reason why regional population change is on the dashboard is because if you're a water system, especially if you're a small water system like everybody here is, and your population is, if it's increasing, that's usually a really good sign. That really helps with your financial stability and your financial resiliency going forward. As your customer base, as the region grows, your customer base is going to grow. And as your customer base grows, you get more of those revenues coming in with your base charges, your monthly minimum charges, and with all the volumetric rates that you charge as well. So the faster your community is growing, typically that's a really good sign with financial resiliency. It helps a lot on the revenue side for your utility. Now, if you're going too fast and you have to expand your water system and spend a lot of money on capital to provide access to everybody, that changes the perspective a little bit. But just from year to year, as you're growing, generally that helps on the revenue side. On the flip side, if your community is losing population, even if your water system isn't right now, but your city is losing population over time, and a lot of communities, a lot of small towns in California and in other states are seeing population declines. That's a significant impact on a financial resiliency for water systems. If your population, if your service population is starting to decline, if your region is declining, your service population will eventually start declining too. And if you're losing customers, you're losing that revenue that you're providing. And your costs don't really go down significantly just because you're losing customers. Your costs are mostly fixed costs. So how much you're spending on providing service to customers does not change very significantly based on the number of customers that you're serving, because they're mostly fixed. So if you're losing population, you're losing a lot more revenue than you're able to reduce your expenses. And that's typically, in the long term, could be very problematic for water systems financial performance. So this is really here to help communicate, is your community growing? Is your community losing population? And if it's losing population, I would recommend making sure that your projections, your budgeting for the next few years to accommodate these forecasts, that you're losing some population. So you need to accommodate your rates to account for reductions in revenue because of customers, because of reductions in customers. Let me zoom out 1 second. And then the last input that you have here on this main page. So we've got a lot that we covered here. The last input is that you could take a look and see what happens if you raise your rates. So we know from experience that a lot of times utilities would actually take this dashboard and present that information to their governing boards and show how their rates compare and whether or not their financial performance metrics, both this dial as well as other dials you'll see on the financial benchmarks tab, if their financial performance is doing well or not, how does that compare to the rates? So if our financial performance is low and our rates are low, then maybe we should think about raising our rates, that we shouldn't have such low rates. If our affordability metrics look really high, then should we consider creating customer assistance programs or some other metrics? If you can, with California, there's some rules about that. So there are ways to, we know that from other states that have dashboards, they've communicated this information, presented the dashboard to the elected officials and had discussions about what to do with their rates going forward and their financial performance and capital planning going forward. And a lot of times the elected officials want to know what happens when we approve a 5% or a 10% rate increase. How does that really affect any of these metrics? And so we have it in here in this dashboard where you could select right underneath the map, you can select to raise your rates by a certain percentage, and you can go up to 150% if you're really gutsy and you really want to go that high. But let's say you're raising your rates by about 10%, and you'll see that the dials will change for almost all of these metrics. So with this is Hilmar again. Hilmar's rates now went up from that $25 to $28 and 22 cents because of a 10% increase. So you can see that little light needle here. That's the old information, and then this is where you would go now. So so the needle has moved a little bit, but they're still on that low side relative to all other utilities. The conservation signal hasn't, that marginal price, the volumetric price hasn't changed because it's a flat fee. So that doesn't go up, it's just a flat fee that's gone up. And then you can see that the financial ratio has improved a little bit. They've gone a little bit more into the green area because revenues will have gone up a little bit. And we've estimated a little bit of a, that it's not a one-to-one. If you raise your rates by 10%, your revenues are not going to go up by 10%. It'll go up by 10% less 3%. So we estimate about a 0.3 elasticity, essentially. You can see how that 10% rate increase affects the percent MHI. It's a very, very small increase for Hilmar. And of course, that does not change population change. So that doesn't move at all. But you can change your rates and quickly see kind of the effects of raising your rates and how that affects your metrics. And as soon as you do that, you get this caution screen up here that says, this is a very quick simulation of what might happen if you raise your rates, but it does not take place, or it's not supposed to be used in lieu of a more in-depth rate study. If you're going to be raising rates, you still need to do your calculations. You still need to do a rate study, whether it's internally or with a consultant, to make sure that you're accounting for all of the costs and all of the expenses and all of the revenue generation that you're creating. So again, this is a really great way to just quickly assess what a rate increase might do, but go back and actually crunch those numbers because you need to do that to get a more complete picture than what you can get from the dashboard.
And Shadi, we have a question. Can you capture rate increases at different rates per tier?
The great question. So no, what we do here is based on what consumption, I guess it's a yes or no, but based on what consumption points you're comparing to right now. So I'm going to switch back to Corning because it has volumetric rates. So with Corning, their consumption point, let's say we start off at 600 cubic feet. They're charging $26.82, and you raise your rates by 10%. It's looking at what that percent increase would be on that consumption point. It's 11%. But if you change at any other consumption point, it's showing you what the increase would be for that consumption point too. So what we're assuming here, what this dashboard does is it assumes that rate increase applies across the board for all consumption. So your base charge and your volumetric rates all go up by this 11% that I'm showing here. So it's not set up to do what happens if I keep my base charge or my minimum charge fixed, but I only want to raise my tier 2 rates. You can't do that with the dashboards. We have other spreadsheet models that you can download, an Excel spreadsheet model that you can download for free, and you can do exactly that. You can look at your each of your rate structures and all of the details of the rate structures, what the consumption allowance is, what the minimum charge is, what the tiered rates are, and then what happens if you raise any one of those tiers by a certain amount, or what happens if you go from $5 to $7. We have that spreadsheet available. I think it might be linked to, yes, it's actually linked to here. So if you go to that bill comparison dial and you click on that question mark, you can read information about the dial, but at the very bottom, you can click on this link, the water and wastewater rates analysis model, and you can download that Excel spreadsheet to do exactly what you're asking to do. But the dashboard doesn't automatically do that for you. Great question. Any other questions for me to address right now? Okay. So this was kind of a view of the main screen with a lot of different metrics. We look at comparing bills. We're looking at how the volumetric rates at high consumption might be incentivizing conservation. We're looking at financial performance, both in terms of revenues coming in, whether that's enough to pay for expenses, and looking at your reserves, whether the reserves are relatively high, relatively low. We're looking at how your rates compare to income levels for your community. And we're looking at population change for that city or the community that you're serving. And it's a lot of information that's being presented in 6 relatively simple dials. It's yellows, reds, and greens. So hopefully everybody can quickly understand when you're in the red zone or if you're in green zone, what's good and what's bad. And it portrays a lot of that information without you having to go through multiple data tables and multiple different sources, and it presents different screens to your elected officials or to your customers. It's all captured in this one page here. If you want to
we do have a question that comes through, and it's asking, could you clarify who the specific audience are or would be for this dashboard? I know you mentioned in the beginning. I think it's worth repeating.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the dashboard could be used by anybody. The main audience that we found for the dashboard have really been for utility managers, the people who are responsible for the financial management of water systems, because they typically want to gather a lot of information about their financial performance, what the rates are, how they compare, and present that information both to the elected officials, to the governing boards of the water system, as well as to customers, and in some cases even to respond to questions from the media if they're asking about rate increases. So the primary audience, I think, are the utility managers and utility staff responsible for the financial management of the water system. So for a small water system, that might be the water system owner. For medium-sized systems or a little bit larger systems, you might have a finance director, for example, or a town manager that might be focused on the financial management of the system. So that's the primary audience that we've seen from other states. I'm curious to see whether or not in California we get a different kind of audience for this, because it's available to the public. And governing boards use this also for decision-making purposes, whether it's presented to them or they can just go in and access that dashboard themselves. So they can go in and do the comparisons themselves and get the context that they need to be able to make a decision going forward. Customers can use it to understand, to get some information about their water system. I've had some potential customers, some businesses in different states, not for California, but some businesses calling to get some understanding of the rate structures in different states to better understand where they might want to locate their businesses. Because if water price is such an important factor in determining location of their business, comparing rates and understanding the financial performance and the capacity of the system to provide services to them is all important. And in some states, we have that information available on the dashboard. So we get a lot of different audiences for this dashboard in other states. For California, the primary purpose is utility staff, but it's also available for everybody else. I hope that answers the question. It's a long way of answering it. Okay, so I'm going to dive into. So again, the front page has all these different metrics, and it's giving you a broad view of multiple metrics to help you get a lot of different context as you're doing either rate comparisons or looking at financial performance. But if you want to dig deeper into a specific thing, like financial benchmarks or affordability, we have more metrics available. So you'd click on the tab at the top, and it takes you to additional metrics. So let's start with the financial benchmarks. And 2 of the 4 that you see here, we've already talked about. We've already talked about days cash on hand, which is at reserves estimates. We've already talked about cost recovery, which includes depreciation expenses. We also calculated a cost recovery that's only focused on operations and maintenance. So we take that same ratio that we talked about for cost recovery, but we excluded depreciation. So we're just looking at your operating revenues divided by operating expenses, excluding depreciation. So it's really a question of, did you have enough revenues coming in fiscal year 2018 to pay for daily operations and maintenance only? No debt service, no capital projects, no saving anything for depreciation of past of existing assets. It's just operations and maintenance. And if you're less than 1.0 here, then for that system in that fiscal year, the revenues coming in was not enough to cover operations and maintenance, which means that they had to use their reserves to cover that gap for that 1 year. For 1 year, that obviously it is problematic if you're less than 1.0. If it's happening for multiple years, then you're creating you're using up your reserves more and more quickly, and that becomes a longer term financial viability concern as well. But this is, I would say, any system that's seeing less than 1.0 here might want to just assess the financial performance of the enterprise fund and make sure that the rates are sufficient to generate all the revenues needed, because if you can't cover just operations and maintenance, and you have debt service in addition to that, or other capital costs in addition to that, then you're going to have a very difficult time raising the revenues that you need going forward as well. So it's an important indicator, I think. And for that one, again, because there's no capital included at all, that target for a green zone is much higher. We're saying you can't just be looking at just having enough revenue to cover operations and maintenance. You need to be covering operations and maintenance and generating more revenue for additional capital expenses. So really we're aiming for at least 50% higher than what your O&M costs are. And the last metric here is revenue per connection. And again, this is just an assessment of financial capacity for the water system. So if you're able to generate more revenues per customer, per connection, then you've got more financial capacity to be able to accommodate different kinds of expenses. The lower you are, the less ability that you have to pay for expenses. And it's there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just what is that number? So for Corning, their average revenues per connection was about $587 per year. So it's almost like an average bill. And you can see the range for all the water systems ranges widely between 148 to over 9,000. And I think that over 9,000 has a special case where they've got small number of customers. I think they have bulk customers, wholesale customers. So the revenues they generate from small number of customers is much higher because they're wholesalers. They're not just residential. But the median is close to about 887. So Corning is generating less revenue than the median. If we go back to Hilmar, they're generating $400 per connection, which is again less than the median, but higher than the minimum here. So with these metrics, again, they're quickly there to portray. So with Hilmar, I would say if you take a look, they're both, both of these cost recovery metrics are above that 1.0, which is good. They're close to that green zone. But again, the target for green zone is not based on something specific. It's a reminder to be aiming for much higher than 1.0. So Hilmar is doing that, so that's good for fiscal year 2018. That looked good. $406 out of per connection is less than the median, which compared to other systems, you're generating less revenue per connection, but that there might be some room for improvement. But if you're happy with the revenues you're generating because they're paying for all the expenses that you're paying, then that's good. If you switch back to Corning, the story is a little bit different, where their operating ratios are both in the red. So they didn't have enough revenues coming in to pay for O&M expenses, let alone O&M and depreciation. So the story there is that they need to have generated more revenues in that fiscal year, which might mean that they should consider a rate increase. And they can go back here and see, oh, look, our rates were low. We're charging $33 and it's lower than 90% of all the other utilities, but our revenues are low. So potentially we should be thinking about, raising our rates in order to make sure that we're financially sustainable going forward.
Hey, Shadi, this is Kristen. We had a question that came in related to cost recovery. Are you including non-operating income in the calculations for cost recovery?
Great question. No, we're not. So this is only looking at operating revenue. So if a significant portion of the revenues that you're using to pay for your expenses comes from non-operating revenues, for example, if you have a lot of development and you're generating a lot of capacity fees or system development fees, I don't know what you might be calling them, but if you're charging a lot of capacity fees to developers and you're relying on a significant portion of your revenues coming from that to pay for your water system, then you're not showing, that revenue is not going to show up in these metrics. So if that's the case for Corning, that might explain why their operating revenues are low, relatively low, because they're getting additional revenue coming in from non-operating side, and it's not showing up in these metrics. So as with any dashboard, as with any public available information like this, you should always dig deeper and find out a little bit more about what's going on in your utility. This is what's available right now, what we could present right now as a quick first shot. But if there's more, if there's a concern like this, then I would say take a look and make sure that you fully understand the rest of the context that's not able to be presented on the dashboard.
Thank you, Shadi. And we've got about 10 more minutes and we'll need to move on to the Q&A session. So
okay. The last two are relatively quick, so I'll that should be no problem. Thank you. So the next tab is focused on affordability, and the first one here, the middle one here is the one that we talked about before, the percent median household income, and this one's only looking at 600 cubic feet. So it doesn't matter what consumption points you're looking at over here. We're only looking at 600 cubic foot for all three of these metrics, just to keep it steady. So you don't have to keep flipping back and forth. And it's, again, it's the metric that's being used for assessing other types of, in other types of metrics as well. So if I switch back to Hilmar real quick. Their percent MHI is 0.49. Now, with median household income, one of the issues with using percent MHI as one of the affordability metrics, or as the only affordability metric, is that it's assessing what how that average bill is, or what the 6 CCF bill is for a household at the median income, which means that that household is making less than or more than half of what the other customers are using. When you're looking at affordability, a lot of times the concern is not so much what the affordability is to a median household income, but more of what's the affordability on lower income customers. And you don't get that with percent MHI, but you could get that from other data sources too. So the next dial here to the left is very similar to percent MHI, but instead of looking at the median household income, it's looking at the income of a household at the lowest 20th percentile. So the lowest quintile, essentially. And with Hilmar, the 20th percentile income is $28,000. So that median household income, I think, was $62,000, and then the 20th percentile income is 28. So now we're focusing on lower income customers. And how does this bill for 6 CCF? How is it affordable? How does it compare to the income levels of lower income customers at that 20th percentile income? And you can see it's 1.09% here. So it tells a different story than this median affordability metric. And this is an important one to consider, because that means that if your customer base, if 20% of your customer base is making less than that, then they're actually paying more than 1% of their income to pay for 6 CCF every month. And if you switch to, I think Corning had higher rates. So with Corning, we're talking about 2% of the income. Now, is 2% affordable for low income customers, or is it not? And that's a question, again, to be determined by by your elected officials, by the local decision makers. I don't know whether 2% is considered high or low for low income. I think that's something that you need to decide. There may be some guidance that comes out from the state. I'll let the water boards address that. But right now for the dashboard, we don't show a specific target. It's just communicating what that percentage is. And the third metric is one that's being proposed as an alternative to these kind of percentages. It's interpreting how many hours somebody who is making minimum wage would have to work in order to pay for their 6 CCF bill. So if I'm making minimum wage in the city of Corning, I'm making, I think it's $12 an hour because it's at the state's minimum wage. And to pay for my 600 cubic foot bill, I have to work 2.2 hours and spend all of that money without considering taxes on the water bill. And what is that high or low? Again, that's a decision to be determined by the local decision makers. But it communicates the number of hours that you'd have to work at the minimum wage to pay for that consumption point. We do notice that there's a decimal place issue here that we're correcting, so I apologize for that. But we provide some more information that's coming from Census Bureau right here. So for Corning, we're showing Corning City, what the percentage of individuals living in poverty, or percentage poverty of that community is 34%. We're showing that 56% of people in that city have income that's lower than twice the rate of federal poverty threshold. And then we show the median household income as well as the percentile, the 20th percentile income, and the 2018 unemployment rate. Now, with COVID-19, unemployment rate has changed significantly for a lot of communities. We're showing everything here is coming from Census Bureau, and that's the latest available information from Census Bureau is the 2018 American Community Survey. So that's it tells you what conditions were like pre-COVID. And on the last tab here, we're showing some information that's pertinent to the water system performance. So if you've had any water quality violations or monitoring violations between July 2017 and June 2020, so over a 3-year period between 2017 and 2020, we show the number of violations that have been reported. We show a little bit of information about the water system ID and what the water system name is and source water type, and what the service population is and number of connections as reported or as included in the database that contains all this information, which feeds into the Safe Drinking Water Information System that EPA ultimately manages. For water systems that have there is data. There is some data on percentage of customers or percentage of connections that have metered connections. You'll see that here, so it'll be a percentage. Corning doesn't have that, unfortunately. I don't know if Hilmar does. Hilmar doesn't either. But for, again, a lot of systems, unfortunately, we don't have that data, but for some systems, there's a percentage estimate of number of connections that are metered, and that's important because at least for water auditing, to know where your water is going and how much non-revenue water you're generating, either because of leaks or because of billing issues. Having more meters out there and you're accessing data from the meters at the customer level or at the household level, the more connections you've got, the more data you have, the more you're able to account for the water that you're distributing and whether you have high, why you might be having non-revenue water. The last one is important though, and that's the compliance status with the human right to water requirements from the water boards. And there are, I think, 3 or 4 different levels here. And if you're a water system that is, the status is that you're in violation of the human right to water watch lists or requirements, it will say in violation, and you can always click on the question mark here to be taken to the water board's website that addresses human right to water. So it's communicating, right now it's communicating data as of July 30th, 2020. Now in the future, if the dashboard can be updated, hopefully this could be updated in the future as well. But right now it's a static as of July 2020. What was your status with human right to water? And it again provides the population information that we talked about on the front page here for the utility. So that's the dashboard. I'm gonna I'm gonna switch back to sharing the PowerPoint slides because I think that we'll have time for questions, but I think I might have a couple more slides to talk about here. Am I sharing the right thing? So if you notice, if you're using this dashboard, again, it's available right now. We're hoping that everybody starts using it. If you notice that there's any corrections to be made, or if there's missing data on your water system is on the dashboard, but it's missing some information, or there's some corrections that need to be made for that time period that's being presented on the dashboard, feel free to email us at this link, efc@sog.unc.edu by November 30th, and we'll update the dashboard with your information. Again, this is only for water systems between 500 and 3,300 connections. So if you're smaller or larger, we're not going to be adding the system to the dashboard at this time. And we're also not updating information. So if your rates have changed since July 1st and you want to show your latest information, we won't be updating those because we want to make sure that the comparisons that everybody's making is for the same time period. So everybody's comparing July 2020 rates and everybody's comparing fiscal year 2018 or looking at their fiscal year 2018 financials. And we have to keep it steady stay the same for everybody during this comparison period. And then this might be the last question I have. Yeah, the last slide is, if you're using this dashboard and you have some questions and you'd like for us, the Environmental Finance Center, to talk to you and to help you understand the metrics on the dashboard and what it might mean for decision making. How do we interpret kind of the overall message that the dashboard is portraying about your data? We're happy to do that. We can provide that assistance directly. We can schedule a time and have a virtual meeting, go through the dashboard, explain what the metrics mean, and explain kind of the overall message to you, and have a discussion from that. Like, what could you do going forward to improve some of those metrics and some of the financial capacity of your system going forward based on what you see from the dashboard? To do so, I would recommend that you contact my colleague, Stephen Lapp, at the email address you see here by the end of March. And we'll be happy to schedule a time to go over the dashboard with you. Or you can let us know, I'm not sure if you can maybe post it as part of a chat or a question, but if you wanted to let us know that you're interested during this webinar, we can always follow up afterwards too. And with that, I think I am done. I'm going to pass things back over to Kristen.
Thanks, Shadi. Why don't you leave the screen up and we'll just, oops, looks like,
okay, I'll go back.
Never mind. Yeah, why don't you bring it up, because I think we might go bouncing back and forth between the PowerPoint and the dashboard during Q&A. We're going to do a quick poll right now. I just want to get a sense, try to launch the poll if I can get it. There we go. There we go, launching. What are your initial impressions of the Small Water Systems Rates dashboard? I know that this is probably for a lot of you the first time that you're seeing this. We're asking, do you like it? Do you want to see some modifications to what you've just seen? It is a pilot. We do have time to make some adjustments. Or, do you not like it? We'd also want to hear from you if this is something that you are not a fan of. And some of you may say that you need some more time. So let us know. Leave this open for just 10 more seconds. Okay, and the poll, share the results. It looks like 68%, majority of you like it. Some of you want to see some modifications. Please email us at our safer@waterboards.ca.gov website or email address to let us know what modifications you'd like seen, or raise your hand. We have time for Q&A. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And a few of you need more time, which we totally understand. Stop sharing results. Next slide, Shadi. Shadi, can you advance the slides forward, please?
I thought I did. One more? Oh, I'm not sure.
Yes.
Here we go. Is that better?
Yes, thank you. So what are our next steps? We are, again, looking for feedback on this pilot dashboard. I encourage you to play around on the site, to explore the data that's available. We've got the hyperlinks here. We have our background paper that was mentioned before. So if you have any follow-up questions, definitely encourage you to check out that background paper. But please email us by November 30th with any questions, comments, suggestions. We want to hear from you. Next slide, Shadi. I want to talk a little bit about the State Water Board's vision for the future. Again, this is a pilot dashboard. The questions and comments that have been coming in behind the scenes have been super helpful for us to see and hear from you about what your initial thoughts are. We are trying to assess the value of collecting and analyzing and displaying this financial information for systems. Like Shadi mentioned, the data set that UNC compiled for this dashboard is a snapshot in time. It's one data set that is not going to be maintained, at least for right now, not going to be maintained and updated with new data. But we want to hear from you if this is something that is beneficial for systems, for stakeholders, even from internally. We want to hear from State Water Board employees as well. Is this valuable? If so, then we're going to look at how we can collect this information in the future, where and how to display it. A lot that we can do in this space. We want to make sure that as the State Water Board, as the regulatory agency, that we can continue to develop new tools and resources to help support TMF capacity analysis and development for our systems. Next slide. One thing I really wanted to highlight is we are making a few changes to our 2020 electronic annual report. This is an annual survey that water systems are required to complete every year. There is a section that has historically collected some financial information from systems, and we are expanding it in the 2020 electronic annual reporting year to ask for some baseline high-level revenue and expense data. You'll see in the dashboard a number of indicators that we're looking at, the operating ratio, looking at revenues and expenses, and this data will help the water board start moving in that direction so that we can look at that data for systems. So this should be coming out soon, and we will be, of course, our EAR data will be publicly available. If you have questions about this, please don't hesitate to contact us at that safer email address. Happy to share more information. Shadi, next slide, please. And with that, we really want to open it up to Q&A. We've received a number of questions through the chat window, through the Q&A window, and through our email. I'm going to hand things over to OPP, and they're going to walk us through these questions.
Yes, thank you so much. All right, so we're now open for public comment or questions. Remember, we do have a Q&A feature that we will be checking and a safer email that you can submit your questions or comments. If you'd like to verbally speak your question or comment, please raise your hand using the button on your Zoom screen. Also, just a reminder, please be mindful of time as we want to provide everyone an opportunity to speak to be able to. So let's start with a question that we got on one of our safer channels. So someone said, thanks, this is really helpful and we're currently in the middle of a rate study and a dashboard like this would be really helpful. But it seems like you need to have the accurate data provided to do something like this. Being said that this is a pilot, has the state agreed to adopt the tool? Or is that one of the reasons for today's presentation?
It's a great question. It's one of the reasons for this presentation and for the pilot dashboard. It is limited, obviously, to community water systems with service connections between 500 and 3,300. We want to hear from the public and from systems if this is valuable. If it is, then we will explore how we can maintain or replicate the data sets and the tools that this dashboard has embedded. So we definitely want to hear from you.
All right, thank you so much. So another question is, how about investors? Are they interested in the solvency metrics?
All right, so this is Shadi again. We do have the investor-owned utility in here as well. I'm not sure if that's what they're asking about, but as far as water systems are investor owns, we have the metrics in here. If the UCLA Luskin Center for Innovation was able to access some of that data from the Public Utilities Commission. So what data was provided from financial statements are in here as well. And it is important to know, even for investor-owned utilities, how revenues compare to expenses. Now, there are different ways for regulated utilities to manage their finances and their particular rules and ways to assess that. But I think that solvency or having enough revenues coming in to cover expenses is important, at least for some of the metrics that you see here. And for some utilities, they might not be concerned about depreciation quite as much. But I think that you'll still, the operating revenues compared to O&M expenses is an important metric for everybody to make sure that revenues are coming in to cover all their expenses.
Thank you so much, Shadi. And to the person who asked that question, if you'd like to further clarify, you can raise your virtual hand as well if you feel like you'd like to speak. So we have one more comment before we jump onto the Q&A feature that's located on the Zoom webinar. This comment says the MHI for Hilmar is off. Our district service area MHI is around 43,000. That's a big difference from 62K that census data shows. Would change your numbers a bit, I would think.
Yeah, so that's one of the examples that if you notice that there are some differences or some data that you would question, and especially data that might be coming from other sources, like the Census Bureau or data that's being accessed from CIDWIS or some other data source, send us an email. I think my email address, I'm going to switch back to that slide so you can see where you send your email, and we can make that correction. Now, we started off with, this one right here. We started off with data that's coming in directly from Census Bureau and from CIDWIS. We were tying into their databases, and we essentially linked each utility to a community, to a census place. And with Hilmar, we've linked Hilmar to the Hilmar CDP, and Census Bureau is reporting the income levels for Hilmar as of 2018 to be 62,000. If that's incorrect, we could try to find a way to modify that number. But again, it's for all the systems, we're starting off with the Census Bureau numbers directly. It's not coming from the water board. So I need to make that clarification again, that the water boards has a different number for median household income when they're doing assessments. So if you're concerned about percent MHI when you're applying for funding, the percent MHI number is going to look different for the water boards than what you might see on the dashboard here. So if that's your concern, I wouldn't be too concerned about that, because that will be accommodated when you're going through the applications.
Thank you so much, Shadi. And it looks like we don't have any virtual raised hands right now. So let's jump to the Q&A feature. So Donald asks, how can the percent of people that are 2 times below the federal poverty line be more than the percent of people below the poverty line? And this has 2 thumbs up.
So the way that's calculated is the percent of people below poverty line, there's a specific thresholds based on household size. And the Census Bureau counts the number of households that have, let's say it's below 25,000. And it calculates it and says, all right, for this community, you have 20% of households below that 25,000. The other metric is taking that 25,000 and it's doubling it. So it's looking at 50,000. How many households are below $50,000 for income? And that percentage should be higher because you have more households that are between 0 and 50,000 than between 0 and 25,000.
Thank you so much. Don White asks, the needs assessment hasn't been completed yet, so how did you identify at risk and potentially at risk? This has 2 thumbs up.
I can start that, but I would appreciate Kristen adding on. And we've gotten, for that particular metric, we had, the water boards had provided us with what was the data that was available as of July 30th, 2020. So we're just showing what was included in there at that time. Now, Kristen, do you want to add to that?
Yes, in the last fund expenditure plan, we did have a list of at-risk systems that was generated using a different methodology than the one that we're currently in the process of developing. Don, I think that's what you're referring to. We're going to double check. We may look at removing that from the dashboard, but that data set is being pulled from the last fund expenditure plan using a different methodology.
All right, thanks y'all. Next question, Christopher asks, are there underlying data and source code of the dashboard available to the public? This has a thumbs up.
There is one way to access, I'm going to share the dashboard real quick. It's one of the features I didn't get to. Actually, it might be the only feature I didn't get to. If you scroll down, so once you select the utility, select what consumption point you want to compare to, and what the comparison groups are, you can scroll down to download data. And what that does is it creates this view right here that provides the information that's being displayed on that dashboard at that time. So it shows you what the consumption, what the bills are for that utility. It's giving you the information on the financial metrics for that utility, and then it's giving you the ranges and what the minimum, maximum, and median are for some of the comparison dials. So all the data that you see on the dashboard here, you can get from this view, and you can do that from by selecting as you're going through your utility. As far as the some kind of a database or a spreadsheet of all the data, that's not been developed, and that's maybe something for us to talk to with the water boards about going forward. So it's a good question.
All right, thank you. So it looks like we have 2 more open questions and an email comment. So the next question we have, it's actually more of a comment. This would be feedback on the tool. Many use property tax revenue, standby revenue, and water receipts later received through tax liens. These are in the audits. So Marina West has left that comment.
Thank you. And that goes back to, I think, the question that was brought up about non-operating revenues and how does that affect the metric. So you're right, with utilities are generating revenues that are not coming from operating revenues, whether that's taxes or other fees. The metrics that you see for financial cost recovery will be affected by that because the operating revenues will be lower. So it's a good point. It does, on the dashboard, it does very clearly say when you that we're only showing operating revenues compared to operating expenses. So it's one of those things where if the metric looks low, then, and the reason behind that is because a significant portion of your revenues come from non-operating revenues, you'll be able to explain that, and it wouldn't create any kind of cause for concern when you see the metric is below 1.0. So thank you for that comment.
So it looks like we have one more comment question in the Q&A feature, then we'll jump to emails. So someone says, this is a phenomenal tool. The state has spent tens of thousands of dollars in the past on a drinking water portal, which was not nearly so helpful. How will the state move more significant resources to useful tools like this one? And this has 2 thumbs up, actually.
and I'll take this one, Shadi. So a great comment, and it's something that the SAFER program within the State Water Board is working on right now. We are developing a new database, a new platform really for analyzing and storing data like this data and showing it and making it more available to the public. We call it our SAFER Clearinghouse, which hopefully in the next year or 2 we'll be able to have a public portal that will include dashboards like these, not only for financial metrics, but other TMF capacity metrics. We'll be sharing the analysis of our risk assessment, our cost assessment, and other things that we're doing as part of our SAFER program and the needs assessment. So more to come on that. We are dedicating resources and time towards building more tools like this one to make data more publicly available and to help folks really analyze it in a way that will help with decision making. And I think we have another question that's come in.
Yes, thank you, Kristen. So we got a comment over email, and this person offers some modifications. They say to add general water quality to the dashboard, add water systems capacity to it, because if too many folks are moving in, water system may not be able to support all that influx. Folsom, where they live, that's a concern to new development. And then lastly, they say to maybe add water conservation metrics, even though droughts are not uncommon, conservation could be something important to include. So that's a comment someone added. If anyone would like to respond or get feedback.
I appreciate the feedback. I think it's great information, and I think that that's the kind of feedback that we're hoping to hear during the next month. So as folks have some suggestions, please submit them on the SAFER email address. But those are really good questions. Sorry, Kristen, were you trying to say something?
No, that's exactly what I was going to say. You know, we are looking for recommendations on how to improve the dashboard. So please keep them coming. You can email us too at safer@waterboards.ca.gov. And it looks like we have another question that's come in.
Yes, it looks like Chad submitted a question. If this tool is expanded in the future, how will it sift out community systems that skew the data, like camps or resorts/schools, that don't charge residential customers, or systems that are almost exclusively wholesalers?
So I can answer about this particular dashboard. Right now, you're on the dashboard if you're a community water system that charges residential rates, or that potentially would charge residential rates. So if you're a community water system that's only serving a school and you don't have residential, I don't believe that you're on this dashboard. And that's the intent, is that we're showing residential rates here. It's a good question because there are concerns about these kind of outliers. And extrapolating that and talking about other systems that might have additional outliers, like the example where I showed the revenues per connection might be skewed because you have a small number of residential customers, but you also have wholesale customers, and that's why the revenues per connection is high. It's one of those, it's a good point, and it's something to consider going forward for how to exclude some of those metrics when they don't apply, even if your system does have residential rates as well. So it's a very valid point, and I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yes, thank you so much. So it looks like we are wrapping close to the end of this webinar. If there are any last minute questions, comments, looks like we got one. Let's see. This person says, if you're answering whether the system puts the HRW at risk, you'll also need to show water quality status and supply resilience. Do you plan to incorporate these metrics in this dashboard? Do you plan to create different dashboards to answer these questions?
Kristen, you want us to take that one?
Yeah, I think we will see what we can do under this contract that we have now over the next few months for this pilot dashboard. But over the long run, as we continue to implement the SAFER program, we want to have more comprehensive dashboards or portals that incorporate really the a broad set of TMF, technical, managerial, financial capacity metrics, water quality metrics, accessibility metrics, everything that we're looking at as part of our risk assessment in a dashboard to help folks better understand the state of the system. So definitely we're moving in that direction. I think what we're trying to figure out is what can we achieve in the short run with this pilot dashboard for our systems between 500 and 3,300 connections. So all good suggestions. If there are specific metrics that you think should be included and in this pilot dashboard, please feel free to share your suggestions with us. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kristen. And with that, it looks like we're closing up on our webinar. Again, everyone, thank you so much for the interesting and informative discussion and for your great questions and feedback. Before we wrap up, I'd like to thank Kristen and the team and Shadi and everyone for the updates and the presentation. And of course, thank you all for these great questions and comments. Again, if you have any further questions or comments, you can contact us at safer@waterboards.ca.gov, and feel free to reach out to Shadi and Julia for any more questions or feedback that you may have about the dashboard. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.